Would you believe me if I told you that I paid off about $60,000 of low interest rate debt in less than 4 years and I actually kind of regret it? Well, it's because I did. Here's the reason why. Low interest debt when it comes to wealth building really doesn't need to be the highest financial priority. But you know what is? High interest debt. If you are tired of feeling like your high interest debt is ruling your life, well then this video is for you. Hi, I'm Chloe Bear Money Coach, and today we're going to cover how to pay off your high interest debt starting right now. Now, if you're anything like me, when I first started facing my finances, I was absolutely terrified at the idea of finally sitting down, gathering up my logins, and looking at the total amount of debt that I actually had. For me, I was just avoiding it because if I don't know the total number, then it doesn't really exist, right? But here's the thing, in order for us to start making progress on our financial goals, we have to know where we're at today. We can't just keep avoiding the problem. When we avoid it, it's so easy for things like our debt to balloon out of control. So the simple act of finding out where you're at right now can be an incredibly powerful one when it comes to starting your wealth building journey. This is because first, you're finally gonna know. And knowing is hopefully gonna kick you into the let's deal with this mode. And when you realize this is the worst it's gonna get if I follow my debt freedom goal based off of what I'm at right now, hopefully this is the worst it's gonna get, and I'm gonna get incrementally better and better the further on I go. And just by knowing your totals when it comes to your debt, you're already one step ahead of where you were yesterday. Now, the second reason that we really wanna know where we're at when it comes to our totals of debt is because we're gonna keep track of our progress. If you're gonna stick with this plan and you're gonna pay off your debt, it's not gonna happen overnight. We need little things along the way to keep us motivated, and tracking our progress is what's going to help us stay motivated. So the very first step is to first look at all of your debts and organize them by the total balance, the interest rate, and the minimum monthly payment. This will give you a clear picture of where you are, and it's also going to come into play when we talk about the different ways to pay off our debt. So when it comes to actually paying off our debt, there are two main ways that we pay off our debt: the debt avalanche method and the debt snowball method. Let's get into these two different methods. When I first started my debt payoff journey, I had no idea the different ways to pay off debt. I just thought, let me put as much money as possible onto my debt every month and just hope that it works out. But as I started to learn more, I realized what I really want to prioritize is paying the least amount in interest as humanly possible. So if you want to pay the least amount of interest possible, the debt avalanche approach is what you're going to want to do. So remember when I talked about listing out your debts by interest rate and minimum payment? What I want you to do is first organize your debts by highest interest rate to lowest interest rate, okay? We don't care about the balance total in this example because our goal is to pay the least amount of interest. Once you've got that and you've organized your interest rates and your debt, what you're going to do is you're going to prioritize paying off the highest interest rate debt first, and then you're going to continue paying the minimum payments on your other debts as you work towards your debt freedom goal. So how that works is, let's say you have a $1,000 credit card debt that has a 27% interest rate, but you also have a $500 debt that only has a 10% interest rate. The debt avalanche method is going to dictate that you prioritize paying off that $1,000 27% interest rate first, because that's going to save you the most amount on your debt in the long term. We wouldn't prioritize paying off that $500 debt, even though it's tempting because it's the smaller balance of the two debts, but it's only at a 10% interest rate. So instead, we're going to prioritize paying off that $1,000 loan first. Then once you pay off that $1,000 debt, you're going to use all the money that you were putting onto that debt, and you're going to transfer it onto that $500 debt until that debt is paid off. Now, the reason you may want to consider the debt avalanche is what we've already stated. This is going to ensure that you're paying the least amount in interest on your debt. Now, the downsides of the debt avalanche method is sometimes paying off those smaller debts, even though they're higher interest or lower interest, that win feels really good. So it encourages us to keep going. So psychologically speaking, the snowball method may be the better method for you, depending on what motivates you to keep going. So let's talk about the snowball method. The snowball approach is kind of the opposite when it comes to the debt avalanche versus the snowball method. Instead of us prioritizing the highest interest rate debts, we're actually going to organize our debts differently. We're going to organize it by the smallest balance of debt all the way up to the highest balance of debt, regardless of what those interest rates are. So going back to the example that we used earlier, let's say we have that $1,000 debt with a 27% interest rate and we have that $500 debt with a 10% interest rate. Well, which one are we going to prioritize? If we're prioritizing the smallest balance first, we're going to prioritize that $500 debt, even though the interest rate is lower. Now, the reason you might want to use the snowball approach to paying off your debt is because you get those psychological wins as you're paying off total balances. Suddenly, one of those debts that you used to have isn't there anymore, and that can feel really motivating and encourage you to keep going. So if you've got a lot of different debts or a lot of small, medium-sized debts out there, this might be the way to kind of take off that mental load when it comes to managing different debts. So keep in mind, whether you're doing the debt avalanche method or whether you're doing the snowball method, we're going to be paying our minimums on the debts we aren't prioritizing while we're prioritizing one of the debts. So let's say you have 3 different debts and you're prioritizing the highest interest rate debt. Those other debts that you're not prioritizing, we're not going to stop paying those. We're just only going to pay the minimum so we can dedicate the least amount of extra funds to that highest interest rate debt or that smallest debt, depending on which method you decide to use. We never want to skip paying our minimum payments. That can impact our credit. So don't forget that step. Then when you finish paying off the debt that you're prioritizing, we're taking all the money that we were putting on that debt and we're transferring it to either the next biggest debt if you're doing the snowball method or the next highest interest rate debt if you're doing the debt avalanche method. So you're kind of laddering effect of I'm taking this money and once I pay it off, I'm taking all of that money and I'm continuing to pay off that next debt. Now, one of my biggest tips when it comes to paying off debt is that we have to treat our debt payments like a bill. So this is where a budget really comes into play. Budgets are so important. They get a bad rep, but there are tons of different ways to budget. We have tons of resources on different budgets and techniques that you can check out in the show notes. But the budget is going to be really key because we just came up with a debt payoff plan, right? Well, how do we know we're going to stick to it if we're not working those extra payments into our budget? What I recommend you do is if you're doing a zero-based budget or you're doing an anti-budget, whatever type of budget you're doing, plan on incorporating this new amount that you're planning on putting on your debt every single month right on into the budget. And then you know when you get paid, you're going to prioritize that debt payoff, that extra payment on your debt, just like you would your water bill or your Sprint bill or whatever bills you've got out there. Now, if you're a part of the personal finance community, which you clearly are by watching this video, you've probably seen a lot of videos about other ways and hacks to pay off your debt a little bit more quickly. So we're going to briefly touch on some of those ways, but we're also going to create another video where we will dive deep into each one of these topics. So first, these alternative debt payoff methods are only options if and only if, number 1, they provide you with a better interest rate than what you're currently paying. Number 2, you address the behaviors that got you into debt in the first place. And number 3, you have an airtight plan on how you're going to get out of this debt, even if you use one of these alternative options. So on to what those options are. So option number 1 that most of us hear about is debt consolidation or getting a personal loan to essentially pay off all of our debts and take on only one loan. People often consider debt consolidation loans because you're essentially getting a loan to pay off a bunch of different debts, usually credit card debts, and then you only have one loan that you have to manage, and it's usually at a lower interest rate than what you were paying for all of those different debts on their separate accounts. The reason you may want to consider this is it makes managing debt a little bit easier, but you have to be very wary of going this route. It can become a very slippery slope of using personal debts to pay off credit cards that then free up credit cards that you're then able to use again. We really don't want to do that if we haven't done what I said earlier, which is address the behavior that got us into debt in the first place. And 2, we're actually getting a better interest rate than what we had previously by having all our individual debts. The second alternative way that I often see finance creators on the internet and other YouTube videos talking about paying off debt quickly is zero balance transfer cards. What a zero balance balance transfer card is using a credit card with a promotional, usually 18-month period, where you can essentially take the balance of one credit card debt, transfer it over to this card, and you'll get a 0% interest for that promotional period. Like I said, it's usually 18 months, sometimes a year. It just depends on the card. Now, in order for you to do that, usually what happens is they will charge you a one-time fee to make that transfer, but it's usually around 3% depending on the card. Then you have 18 months of 0% interest to pay off that credit card. Now, you may be thinking like, cool, that sounds pretty great. I can go from paying 20 to 30% on my credit cards to paying maybe absolutely nothing for 18 months. I'll get it paid off so much faster. But these are popular for a reason. Often people do not have their airtight plan on how they're going to get out of that debt in that 18 months. And also, what if something happens and you have to take on more credit card debt? And then all of a sudden, the 18 months goes by a little bit faster than we were planning on. And then we get stuck with even higher interest rates than what we would have had we just stuck to the original plan. That's the thing about these zero transfer credit cards is often once the promotional period is over, the interest rates skyrocket to some of the highest credit card interest rates that I have seen out there. We're talking like almost 30%. So you want to be very, very careful with this and only consider it if one, you've got really good credit, two, the reason that you got into debt has already been addressed. You've never had an issue with managing credit cards and that's not the problem. You feel very airtight on this plan. Those are the only times we want to actually consider this. And keep in mind, some of these zero transfer balance credit card fees will have additional fees if you don't pay off the debt within the promotional period. So huge warning sign on that. Read the fine print for those. The last thing that I often see people talking about potentially using this alternative option as a way to pay off their credit card debt or any high interest debt is borrowing from their 401k. Now, if you have a 401k, depending on your employer and provider's rules, you can usually borrow against your 401k up to 50% of the total balance that you have in the 401k or $50,000, whichever is less, for a maximum period of about 5 years. Then your contributions to your 401k moving forward while you have that loan out are actually going to go towards paying off that loan. That sounds pretty good, right? Especially because the interest rate just goes back into your 401k, so you're essentially paying yourself back. But the issue with going this route is that it's really difficult to make up for the lost amount of time when you're borrowing from your future self, essentially. When it comes to investing, compound interest is so key. And if you take the full 5 years to pay yourself back in that 401k, that's 5 years you just missed out on letting that money grow in the stock market, which over the long term, when it comes to compound interest and opportunity costs, that could end up costing you significantly more than what you actually borrowed. So if we can avoid it, we really don't want to steal from our future selves to pay for debts right now. We want to really focus on paying off our debt in other ways and really look at the 401k as a last-ditch option. And there you have it. Here's how you pay off your high interest debt starting today. I know this stuff can be so overwhelming and it's hard to just finally get started and look at your debt, but I promise you, taking those small steps is really what's going to get you to a place where someday you're going to look back and be like, holy crap, look at everything that I did. So getting started with that one first step that we talked about of just logging in and looking at your different debts, that's a huge first step. And then taking baby steps along the way to make your progress. Thank you so much for your time. I'm Chloe Daniels, better known as Chloe Bear Money Coach on the internet. And if you enjoyed this video, don't forget to search BiggerPockets to learn more.